Most major comic characters have a few landmark stories that stand above the rest and that most comic readers are at least somewhat aware of. Extremis is the first big one for Iron Man in the 2000s, or at least one of the big ones that people point to for the 2000s. And generally, it is viewed as a pretty good starting point for a modern era reader if you aren't interested in reading anything from the Silver Age, or late Silver Age, I should say, or any period after that in the Bronze Age, which I think is pretty fair. Between the art and the somewhat boots on the ground vibe that the story has, I think it gives the story an overall very cinematic feel. Very much in line with a Phase 1 MCU era movie. You can really feel this book's fingerprints all over Iron Man 1 in my opinion. Written by Warren Ellis, this released in early 2005 and went into early 2006, coming right off the heels of Bendis' opening arc of Avengers. And I didn't really realize until writing this line that this is now the third consecutive video in a row where I've talked about something from 2005, so I don't know what it is about that year, but I guess it's got some magic to it. The primary focus of Extremis from a character standpoint is Tony dealing with reputation and overcoming the negative one that he has with the want to do good for the greater world. It's really basic sounding, but it's done pretty well. The first real standout example of this is when Tony is interviewed for the documentary Ghosts of the 20th Century, as well as the lead up into that scene. Throughout the interview, Tony is bombarded with the history of creations that he's made for the military in the past, with attempts at rebuttals being made, but they're all completely shot down by the interviewer, despite whatever beneficial thing Tony has to bring up for a rebuttal. Another example later on in the book is when Tony has a discussion with a recluse peer of his named Sal. Sal talks about Tony and the mutual friend that they have with them that day about their careers and how they are only working for corporations, the government, and the military, despite them being the ones that could steer their field into a bright future. For Tony specifically, he makes the analogy of Tony being the Dean Kamen of tech. Similar to the interview earlier on in the story, Tony does try to refute this point by pointing out that Kamen has made useful contributions to science, but Sal brushes it all off by just saying that Kamen is known entirely as the guy who's made the segue. While not as vilifying as the previous example, this one also goes on to show that lesser events that are more famous are going to overshadow any potential good things that you could do or anything more positive that you could do that would outweigh or be more beneficial to your reputation than the dumb thing that you're known for. Tony does agree with these statements being hurled at him, at least to an extent, but not publicly. One of the earliest instances we see of Tony in this is him getting ready for the documentary interview, and in the process of getting ready, he refuses to acknowledge himself in the mirror and doesn't want to even make eye contact with his own reflection. It isn't until Tony later on suits up in the Iron Man costume to stop an incident that he actually wants to see himself, showing that he is more confident and more proud of that than anything that he's done previously in his life. Tony himself explains that the armor was made to save his life, but has become a more freeing extension of himself. And by the end of the book, that sort of becomes quite a literal statement. Speaking of the armor's original purpose, the story does move up the time period for the Iron Man origin, moving it up to being in Afghanistan during the 1990s with an escape sequence that's pretty similar to the one that they used in the movie, this obviously having a lot of influence over that movie. It feels very natural and is told very well. It doesn't completely overhaul the story, it's just a little bit of a side tangent that you're shown a couple times throughout it. And similar to how they move up the origin story for a character like Punisher, this is perfectly acceptable and understandable in my opinion. There's also a bit of a twist at the end of the story that I think is done very well considering how the story is structured, and I'm not going to really spoil it if anybody listening or watching this hasn't read the book, but I will say it does a very good job, and just if you haven't read it, make sure to keep track of everything that's explained throughout the story, and you'll enjoy the twist even more than if you didn't. The only negative thing I really have to say about the story is Malin, the primary villain of it, I think is a little bit boring. Not that I think the story rides entirely on the quality of the portrayal of him. I think the story would be just as good if we barely saw any of him in it outside of the conflicts that he has with Tony. I just think what there is there leaves a bit to be desired, since he's nothing but really just a racist, angry man with cool powers, to be fair, but there just isn't a lot there, and he's kind of just there to serve the role of the antagonist, which, like I said earlier, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think the story relies on him being a quality villain. It's just I wish there could have been a little bit more. The art in this series is fantastic. It is done by Adi Granov, who has worked mostly on covers throughout his career, so having him do both covers and interiors on this is a very nice treat. If you've been reading comics for a little bit, I'm sure you've seen his stuff around somewhere. He's mostly known for being a covers guy. He's worked primarily on Marvel-related books, doing covers for things like Iron Man, Spider-Man, Nova, lots of Civil War-related books, and he's done a fair amount of recent Marvel Star Wars stuff. He's also helped design some stuff for the MCU, most notably the first Iron Man movie, and he also worked on the first Avengers as well. In my opinion, he's right up there with guys like Alex Ross and Lee Bermejo as someone in that kind of lane of realistic-looking style. He's not as realistic as somebody like Bermejo, but he still does a very good job, and it's in that same type of field of realistic comic book paint style of art. It's really cool. So if you're an Iron Man fan and for whatever reason haven't checked out Extremis yet, I highly recommend it. If you're a comic book reader or someone who wants to get into comic books, specifically Iron Man, and are looking for a more modern jumping on point, I think this is an ideal spot for you to do that. It's a good thing that leads right into the more late 2000s era, like New Avengers, Civil War, Matt Fraction's run on Iron Man, all those type of things. This is a good jumping on point to get into that era of Marvel. So with that being said, I want to thank you for watching or listening to this video all the way up to this point. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, all the fun algorithm boosting things that help out the channel. I greatly appreciate whenever you guys do that. And don't forget to just stick around for more stuff coming up here on the channel. We got Batman, Star Wars, just DC Marvel stuff in general, and much more. And I'll catch you guys in the future.